On Saturday, can we see a diminished Motherwell stop the rot by taking the spoils at Ibrox? Or will Rangers bounce back from Wednesday's defeat at St Mirren? And Sunday's doubleheader takes us to Rugby Park for a face-off between Kilmarnock and Aberdeen, before we head to the Time Vortex to watch last season's Scottish Cup final between Hearts and Celtic. Join the panel from 2:30 on Saturday and 11:45 on Sunday for Pass the Mic, the weekend's treble, only on the goggsysaan YouTube channel. You're watching the Gog Pod, and welcome back. It's been a while, but now we're back in emphatic fashion, and we've got a fantastic guest in Derek Ray. How's it going today?
I'm fine, thanks, Gordon. Early in the morning with me, lunchtime with you, but all is well.
I saw on your Twitter, you posted earlier on about Gerard Houllier, who unfortunately is no longer with us. Do you have any stories about when you met him in the 1994 World Cup, was it?
No, it was actually later than that. I had a spell in the early 2000s when I worked for FIFA, for the world governing body, at major tournaments as a media officer. And one of the great things about that job is that you are exposed to a lot of coaches who work for the FIFA Technical Study Group. And at the 2005 Confederations Cup in Germany, I was one of the senior media officers in Frankfurt. And Gerard Houllier was working for the Technical Study Group. In fact, he was helping head up the Technical Study Group, along with Scotland's Andy Roxburgh at that time. And it's just one of these funny things. When you work at these tournaments, you bump into the same people at the same time. And it so happened we were both working for FIFA. We'd both been at the same meetings, and we would sort of turn up for breakfast at around the same time at the hotel almost every morning. And that became my routine, was to sit down, and Gerard would say, "Oh, Derek, come over and sit down." And we would just, look at the newspapers and just have a casual chat and talk about football, about politics, about life generally. And all I can say is, I didn't know him well, but I knew him through that tournament and that breakfast routine every day. And he was just a thorough gentleman, a lovely man, very warm, with interests way beyond just football, although obviously, like the rest of us, he loved his football and was a very good coach and manager. And so sad to hear of his passing. He's somebody who will be fondly remembered by the international football community generally.
Yeah, it's such a shame. I mean, he actually managed my English team, Aston Villa, for a wee bit.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we didn't have too many fond memories, but of course, it's very sad to hear him pass away. But anyway, moving on, because we like to keep this a wee bit lighthearted. So we're going on to the miscellaneous part of the podcast now. As a Motherwell fan myself, you coined my favourite ever phrase uttered by a commentator.
Which was?
Do you want to repeat it?
Well, you can tell me. I think I know which one you're referring to, but go on.
Far part twisting, shouting, shaking as Motherwell accelerate away from Rangers.
Yeah.
What can you remember from that crazy day?
Oh, I still remember everything about that crazy day. Of course, it had been a crazy week, and it was Motherwell and Rangers. It was the relegation playoff. I was working for BT Sport in Scotland at the time. And this was a really big deal. At least it seemed a big deal to me. Obviously, Rangers had been down the divisions. I'd been covering their games down the divisions. Motherwell were an established part of the top flight. But, something had to give in that playoff. It wasn't going to be a playoff between two small clubs. It was obviously going to be a case of one team being disappointed. And the line that I used actually goes back to what had happened in the first leg at Ibrox a few nights beforehand, as you recall, Motherwell winning that first leg 3-1. And after the game, and maybe you were part of this, I don't know, but after the game, the Motherwell fans stayed on in the little corner of Ibrox and were very good-natured, and they did this marvellous performance of Twist and Shout. And I put it on my phone, actually, because I thought it was something I hadn't really heard from Scottish football fans before. And, it's a classic song, Twist and Shout. So I filed that away in my memory, as I do as a commentator. And when in the second leg, the first Motherwell goal went in, which was early in the second half. Marvin Johnson going on a mazy run, took a big deflection off one of the defenders and went high into the back. It was Zalewkas, wasn't it? Yeah, and into the back of the net past Cammy Bell. And there was just this outpouring of joy. I don't think I've heard Fir Park ever as loud as that. And Motherwell fans have told me the same thing, that it just absolutely exploded. And that's just what came to my mind, the twisting and shouting and shaking. So that was where it came from, Fir Park, twisting, shouting, shaking as Motherwell accelerate away from Rangers. And that really was the moment that, for me anyway, settled that issue, because Rangers weren't coming back from that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I was not part of the Fir Park choir at the time. It was a school night, so my mum didn't allow me. Plus, because I live in Fife, it was like impossible to get back by public transport.
So presumably you watched it on BT Sport.
Oh, yeah. I watched it. I was pacing about my dad's living room. And we had a designated celebratory area in the flat, but it was honestly one of the most nerve-wracking yet brilliant days in my life. And I don't know if you remember this, but it was about 23 minutes or so into the game. Andy Murdoch made a bad foul on Stevie Hamill and got a yellow card. And there was a young Motherwell fan sitting in the front row, and he pulled out of his jacket pocket a red card, and he was shouting to Craig Thompson to send off Andy Murdoch. That young Motherwell fan was me. And I remember you saying something like, "Oh, that's the Motherwell fans really getting into it now," or something like that.
I may well have done, yeah. I don't remember that specific incident, but yeah, I could well have said that.
Aye, because it was up there with the Motherwell fan hitting Lee McCulloch with a flagpole or something like that.
Now I do remember that, and I remember in fact, my wife was watching that. My wife, who's American, was watching that back in London where we lived at the time, and I remember my wife saying to me, why do these strange things happen only in Scotland? She said, I've never seen, and I was thinking, I've never seen that as a commentator anywhere, an incident like that, and it is true. Scotland seems to sort of be the country that we look to for oddities like that in a game, for sure.
So does that qualify as the most bizarre thing you've seen on the football pitch, or is there anything stranger?
Now I'd have to rack my brains. Most bizarre things I've seen. I mean, it certainly would be up there in terms of just strange things. I'm sure maybe later in the conversation I'll think of something else, but that was downright odd, yeah.
Because the most bizarre thing I've seen, Motherwell were playing in a friendly at Arbroath a couple of years ago, and Stephen Doris got subbed. Just a wee friendly. Dick Campbell subs him, and then about 5 minutes later, he comes back on, and I'm still perplexed to why this happened. And then Stephen Doris goes and scores in the last minute to beat Motherwell 1-0.
There you go. I suppose the other one that does actually come to mind, and again, this is Scotland, was we did a game at St Johnstone. This is many years ago now, and this probably was actually ESPN days before BT Sports came into operation. And we had a game at St Johnstone against Celtic, and it had to kick off at 6 o'clock for reasons that were, there were actually good reasons behind it. It could only kick off at 6 o'clock and be televised because of the rules that UEFA had introduced because of competition with European games. So it had to go on at this time. We needed to televise it for contractual reasons. But the Celtic fans, or the younger Celtic fans, it seemed, had their own plan with regard to this. And the game was about 30 seconds old. And all of a sudden, there was this flood of footballs that came on from the Celtic, or there were two ends, I think there were Celtic ends, but one of the Celtic ends. And it totally perplexed the players, who began chasing balls, not knowing what the actual match ball was, because there were about 100 of them on the pitch. And this was their protest at the fact that the game had to kick off at 6 o'clock. And yeah, I mean, nobody likes a 6 o'clock kickoff, but there were reasons, and there are still reasons actually why this happens across Europe, to get games in, because you're not allowed to compete with the official slot, or the starting time slot of UEFA matches. So there you go. That was a bit strange too.
That's understandable. I mean, it is quite strange because, of course, you've got the primary competitions of the Champions League and Europa League to compete with as well in midweek.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So moving on, what is your opinion on how fan channels on social media have sort of become a normality in comparison to, say, the mainstream media?
Oh, I think it's good. I think it's a real positive, and I've been exposed to quite a lot of that during this pandemic because obviously people have more time, people have been home a lot more, people have been committed to their own fan podcasts or mini TV shows and things like that, and obviously they want to have guests on those shows. So I've had invitations. I've probably been doing guest invitations almost every day since March. Maybe not every day, but every other day it seems. Certainly more in the last 9 months than probably in the previous 9 years put together. And that just speaks to, I think, the fact that there is a lot of creativity out there. People don't always have the time to be able to apply that creativity, but when they do have the time, then it's great. And there's a lot of passion for individual teams. And that's, I think, something that really comes out with these shows and these podcasts like the one that you do. So, yeah, more power to everybody. And I always say it's something I get asked a lot. How do you get into professional broadcasting? Well, the only way you get into it is by practicing. And practicing is doing this sort of thing. So if people are self-starters, if they're creating content, if they're committed to it, then that's the way to get better, pure and simple.
Excellent. Now, that rolls us on nicely to the next topic. I don't think you've seen any of my work. However, since the 1st of August, the first game of the Scottish Premiership season, we've been streaming watch-alongs on the channel, which can be anything Scottish football related. And we've also done a sort of Soccer Saturday-esque stream for, say, the Champions League 8 p.m. kickoffs in midweek, which we'd have one person covering each game. And I would just flip between each person that's commentating on each game. Can you give any tips about presenting for live streams?
Do you mean presenting with pictures, working with pictures, or just talking about the games generally while they're happening?
About the games in general. Is there anything that I should look up at?
Well, I think that's hard because it's a different skill when you're doing that in comparison with commentating. But I think the broad broadcasting principles apply, which are don't talk too quickly, talk clearly, make your point, be understandable above all else, be excited and passionate. But again, don't overdo that, don't overcook that, because then you sort of lose the focus of what you're trying to convey. What I would also say is, and this is advice that was given to me when I was a very young broadcaster, but I still stand by it to this day now in my 50s, talk to one person. Always imagine one person who you think is watching or maybe know is watching or listening, and talk to that person. Don't imagine you're talking to 5,000 people. Talk to one person, and that will always serve you well. I would say when it comes to humor, just be careful with humor, because we're not comedians. We all think that we're funny, or we think certain things we say are funny, but use humor sparingly, because if you use it sparingly, the chances are when you do use it, it might genuinely be funny. If we try, as I say, to be comics ourselves the whole time, it'll probably fail, because I've got great regard for comedians. I think they're wonderful at what they do. I'm not a comedian, I'm a commentator. I know that. So that I'm not going to try to throw gags every second into a commentary. It'll probably annoy more people than it will please. So a few general thoughts there that maybe are helpful. Yeah,
because it's no longer the case that people go to watch a game and be entertained. They want to see their team win.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that's a really good point that you make, Gordon, because, the fact of the matter is people mostly, when it comes to football broadcasting, they are there to see their team. They're not there to see, Joe Smith or Fred Bloggs or Derek Ray necessarily. That they are there to see their team. And so what we're providing is, a vocal background or sometimes a visual background with regard to what you're doing. Mm-hmm. We should never forget that it's about the football first, and we are merely part of that vocal background.
Mm-hmm. So what was the first game you did commentary on?
Well, the first game that I did professional commentary on was Kilmarnock against Dumbarton for BBC Radio Scotland back in 1986, April of 1986. But of course, I had been broadcasting on an amateur basis for many years prior to that. And people may know my story. I got started really very young, bringing tape recorders to Pittodrie when I was 10, 11. So the first one would have been a reserve game against Dundee back around 1978. And was doing that reserve games, first team games, then hospital radio, which is still around in some parts of Scotland. But I was one of the hospital radio commentators for Aberdeen and did most of their European matches in 83 when they won the Cup Winners' Cup, which was an amazing thrill for a 16-year-old at the time. But the first professional game was Kilmarnock Dumbarton in 1986. And then I suppose I have to then tell you that my second professional game, and what I didn't know was that the first one was an audition for the second one a few days later. Second one was England against Scotland at Wembley in 1986. Yeah, I mean, I was extremely lucky, and I don't think anybody will ever be as lucky again. There was a certain serendipity about all of that, but it all happened for me in that spring of 1986 while I was still a student at Aberdeen University. And I'm very grateful to have been given that chance, because I know that most people would not be given such an opportunity at a young age.
What was the score of that game?
England-Scotland was 2-1 England. It wasn't the best England-Scotland game. It was actually a midweek fixture, which was unusual because most of the time that was always given a Saturday slot, but it was the beginning of the sort of the diminishing of the England-Scotland game. It was just before the 86 Mexico World Cup. Alex Ferguson was in charge of Scotland at that time, and England were ahead 2-0 fairly early on. Scotland came back, a Graham Souness penalty, which made it interesting towards the end, but it didn't quite have, and it would be wrong for me to say that I know this because I hadn't been to an England-Scotland game at Wembley prior to that one, but it didn't seem to have the same bite as the England-Scotland games that I grew up watching in the 70s, when it genuinely was, one of the highlights of the year.
Fair game. So how do you conduct your matchday research?
I conduct my match day research by beginning as far out as possible, so several weeks if I know what the assignment is. For example, I've got a couple of assignments in early January that I've just started preparing for in the last 10 days or so. And what I do is actually quite simple, is I take a normal A4 sheet of paper, I divide it in half, and I use one half to write about the home team and the other half to use to write about the away team. And it's all color-coded. So, if it were Rangers against Aberdeen, Rangers would be in blue, Aberdeen would be in red. You get the drift. And the top half is all my players, my player notes, bios, snippets, whimsy, that sort of thing. The bottom half is more team-related historical notes, stats, news items. It's just a mixture of everything. So when I know I'm doing a particular game, the first thing I do is I go back to my old notes. So, when was the last time I did those teams? What did I say about them then? A lot of them I'll copy from there. Some things I won't because they're no longer relevant. And then find new material and just keep working on that up until the hours leading up to the game. And what I tend to find is that sheet doesn't get properly filled in until right before kickoff, maybe 2 hours before the game. I should also say that I have very small handwriting. Tiny handwriting. Most people will look at my sheets and think, my goodness, what is this? Is this even written in English? It looks like hieroglyphics or something from another age. But the main thing is that I understand it. And I always say to people, that's all that's really important. You're not doing it for show. You're not doing it to auction off later. You're doing it so that you understand it and that you memorize things. And it's a bit like preparing for an exam. It's a bit like the studying you would do for an exam. And what's important is what you reproduce on exam day. And so this is the same principle, that I have it all in my head come kickoff time. And it doesn't really matter how we get to that point. It's about the learning, the studying process. And I took a lot of this actually from my German studies. I was a German student and a very keen one at that. And it's very important to me nowadays, German language and culture. But that's how I learned German, was with color coding and writing things down and going through that whole process. And so I've never changed. People say, why don't you move with the times and do it more electronically? Well, I will say, if you talk to people who know about the subject matter, they will say that handwriting does, in fact, implant information in the brain more efficiently in comparison with just using a computer. And also, the reason why I did this in the first place, too, was that in those days, we didn't have, spacious commentary positions like maybe I had more at BT Sport and have now with ESPN. We had, really tight areas at the back of the stand with no elbow room. So everything had to be on one sheet of paper. It did have to be on one sheet of paper. You didn't have the luxury of being able to leaf through 5 or different sheets. And nowadays I see colleagues who have, 10 different sheets spaced out over a wide table. We didn't have that luxury. And so it's a throwback to that. It works for me. And so that's how I prepare. And that's how it all comes together on match day for me.
Funny you should say that about, of course, being a German student. My mum actually was on a placement in 1991 for a year. She was teaching German and English over in a small town near Bremen. So, So since I went to Germany a few times on holiday, and I've got an affiliation with Werder Bremen.
Good. No, they're a great club, a very proud club, and one of the most successful clubs in German football history as well.
Absolutely, it's just a shame it's been that long since they won the Bundesliga title. But I mean, what can you say now? Bayern Munich are completely tearing it up, and now this season at least there's some competition.
Yeah, but it's interesting. Werder Bremen, when I was going to Germany as a young man in the 80s, as a student, they at that time were, I'm not going to say they were the second force, but they probably were close to that, back when Otto Rehhagel was their coach, a legendary figure. If you talk about the German Cup, they have a cup tradition that most clubs don't have, and this goes back a long way as well. And they are a fabulous club. They had a narrow escape last season. They were very lucky not to be relegated, and they're starting to slide a little bit this season after a brighter start than most of us expected. But no, they're a good team to follow.
Yeah, I had my birthday party the day that they beat Cologne 6-1. The last regular game of the season.
You're not supposed to mention that because that is my club is Köln, so you're not supposed. But it's okay. It's all right. No, it's okay. It was an important win for Bremen, to be fair, because they needed that to be in the playoff, which they won. So that's okay. That's all right. But be careful. Don't say anything bad about Köln
I'll say no more then.
on this show. Be very careful.
So. As a commentator, you could potentially be speaking non-stop for perhaps up to 3 hours, given whatever type of competition it is. Do you have any pre-match voice preparation?
Yes, I do. But the pre-match voice preparation, a lot of the time, is being quiet. Interestingly enough, is resting the voice, so that if I know I have, 2 games at the weekend on a Saturday, on a Sunday, then the days leading up to it, I will be very sparing with using my voice. I will certainly not be shouting. What I do tend to do is I try to think about how a singer might use his or her voice, because there's a lot in common with what singers do with technique. And what we do have to do as commentators is, and at the professional level, we have to be able to hit high notes and low notes on command and not be fuzzy about them. You know what I mean? So that if you hear somebody who's maybe an amateur commentator somewhere, they'll shout and scream and they'll lose their voice. And sometimes people say, oh, that shows the real passion. But I always say, well, actually, that's fine. Maybe that is passionate, but at the professional level, we can't be like that. We can't be all hoarse and we want to be able to, when we hit a high note, we want to be able to hit it exactly. So that's similar to a singer. And that's the one thing that I do practice. I'm not a singer, but I do practice my octaves, my highs and my lows, just when I'm, when I have 5 minutes to myself, maybe during the week, because that is something that, once you're able to do that, then it does stay with you. But your voice changes throughout the course of a week. You know, you might have allergies to dust in your house, or it might be pollen season where you are, you know, and all these things that people sort of think, well, you know, that, why would you think about that? And you're saying, well, you have to, because if you're a professional voice user, you have to think about all of these things, and you want it to sound good on match day. You know, there are times when I've worked when I've not been feeling well, when I've had, you know, a cold or something like that. But that is kind of the commentator's worst nightmare, because then you can't really hit the notes that you want to hit. And, you know, sometimes you can't do the gig either if your voice is not going to cooperate, because it's like a footballer. If a footballer can't kick the ball, then what good is he on the pitch? If a commentator can't speak properly, what good is he or she on match day? So those are the things mostly. But what I say to young commentators is just remember, when you do this job, and again, if you want to do it at a high level, your life will change, because think about it. You know, when people are out having fun on a Friday, you know, using their voice and shouting with friends, well, as a commentator, you can't do that. You know, there is no way to do that. And that has been sort of my life, is you know, not going out with pals or having family occasions on the eve of a big game, or even a couple of days before a big game. And even after the game, you're still thinking, right, when's my next game? Okay, so yeah, I've got to be careful with the voice again, because the worst nightmare is if you lose it. So there's some discipline involved in that as well.
There's a common expression, which is the curse of the commentator.
Yes.
Do you have a perfect example that you may have spoken to soon during a match in your career?
Countless examples. I'm sure that has happened almost every other game. I remember one in particular. I was doing a Celtic game in Germany against Borussia Mönchengladbach, and we were about 20 minutes into the game, and it was 0-0. And obviously I was broadcasting for BT Sport for predominantly a Scottish audience, probably a Celtic supporting audience. And I made the comment that, you know, Celtic were in position, Gladbach were knocking the ball around. They hadn't posed too much of a threat. And I said something like, I said, well, very admirable the way Celtic are keeping their shape here. And then about 2 seconds later, there was a quick ball over the top. Lars Stindl got on the end of it and dispatched it in the back of the net. You know,
so that was a recent game then?
That would have been 2016 from memory. I think that was in the autumn of 2016. But I mean, that happens. To be honest, it happens to me on social media as well now, because if I say something on social media, which it happened this past weekend, I talk a lot about German football, which is my sort of bread and butter these days on social media. And I said something about Schalke, who are in the middle of this terrible run, 26 matches without a win, looked as though they were going to end it on Sunday. They were leading 2-1, and I put a little thing up saying, 10 minutes to go. Are we going to no longer be discussing Tasmania's records, 31-match winless sequence in the Bundesliga? Schalke closing in on victory. Can they do it? And of course, the trouble with social media is it stays there forever. So all the Schalke fans who follow me are going, Derek, you did us in, that's your fault, And I always say to people, well, I don't really have that power. And commentators don't have that power, but we probably a lot of the time utter words that people would utter at home when it comes to that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But that's football. That's the way it goes. But yeah, all the time, I would say almost every game, there will be one incident or another that people will say, you just cursed us there.
What games do you look forward to most while commentating?
Do you mean what league or what?
I mean, it could be
football
perceptive to you. Like, what type of fixture? Like, what? In fact, yeah. What competition do you look forward to most? We'll go with that.
Well, the World Cup is one of a kind. I mean, there is nothing like the World Cup. And I've been really lucky to broadcast every World Cup since 1990. That was my first one on the air. And it just has a magic all of its own. You lose yourself for about 5 weeks. You think about nothing else. You don't sleep very much because you're traveling from venue to venue. You're just wired the whole time. You're thinking about the game the next day. As soon as one match finishes, you're just immersed in the whole thing. So I think the World Cup would take some beating. and you never tire of it, even though you know what's coming. You know it's going to be, this 5 weeks of madness, and you just get on with that, enjoy it, and try to be as prepared as you can, knowing that it's going to be a maelstrom of matches coming all at once.
Of course, moving on, for the younger audience that's watching, you're the voice everyone hears when they concede a goal in FIFA.
Yep.
How did this gig originally come about?
Well, it came about really as a surprise to me in late 2017. I had not long left the UK. We had decided in 2017 that we were going to move back here to the USA. I'm talking to you from the Boston area. I've lived quite a big chunk of my adult life here in the Boston area. But we just decided that we had done what we wanted to do in the UK. And so I was back freelancing here in the US. And lo and behold, at the end of the year, I got an email from a third party representing, all it said was, a video game company. And they'd be very interested in talking to me about doing something for this video game company. It was all very vague, all sort of cloaked in a bit of secrecy. After a few days, it emerged that it was not just any old video game company, it was EA Sports, and it was the big one, FIFA. So they wanted to meet me, so I went to Vancouver, where they're headquartered, and did an audition for them. It turns out that they'd been following my work for a long time. What people maybe didn't know in Scotland about me was that for many years prior to moving back to Scotland, I'd been away for a long time, I had been the main voice of the Champions League for ESPN around the world. And ESPN had rights to the Champions League, not just in the USA, Canada, but also in Latin America, Caribbean, Australia, New Zealand, Africa, the Middle East, big parts of the world there. And sometimes I think in the UK, people have a tendency to look everything sort of through the UK lens, and they think that, because I say when I went back to Scotland in 2009, a lot of people just didn't know my work because I hadn't been on UK TV for 20 years. So there's a whole generation that didn't know me at all. But that's digressing a little bit. But so 2017, we got together on it, and they said, we'd like you to be part of the game. And the reason why they wanted me to be part of the game was they were going to be getting rights to the Champions League and the Europa League. So they wanted a voice on the Champions League and the Europa League that they thought was a good fit for that competition. And remember, the game is a worldwide game. It's not just a UK game. That was really what I was trying to say. So that they wanted somebody who they thought would go well with the Champions League around the world. The only thing was that I couldn't tell anybody that I was doing this, because contracts still had to be signed with regards to the Champions League. And so I had to sort of, be a bit secretive and evasive, even to my friends, about what I was doing, even though we were recording for several months in the early part of 2018 and into the summer of 2018. But I couldn't quite tell people what I was going into the studio to do. And then, of course, they announced it in June, just before the World Cup, before I went off to Russia to broadcast that World Cup for Fox Sports here in the USA. EA Sports announced that I was going to be their commentator for the Champions League with Lee Dixon. And since then, it has moved on to not just Champions League and Europa League, but in fact, the whole game these last 2 years. And of course, the most recent edition of the game, FIFA 21, is out. And if you play FIFA 21, then I would not blame you for being a bit sick of the sound of my voice at this stage.
Of course. So is there anything you think that, of course, we've had the whole COVID this year. How much did that affect your work?
Hugely, because my life is normally traveling every week of the year. That has been my life, really, going back, a couple of decades. That's just what I've done. And so when I came back here, as I mentioned, went into the freelance world, bouncing around different broadcasters, spending a lot of time in Germany too, for the Bundesliga as one of their world feed commentators. But all of a sudden, I'd been in Germany in February for a chunk of games over a 10-day period. I think I did 7 or 8 games in 10 days, traveling up and down Germany in the league and the cup. And then I flew back, and I'd been reading about COVID in the German papers because it hit Germany slightly earlier than it did the UK. There'd been these cases just outside Munich, where I was in actual fact at the time, at a car parts manufacturer. And so there were studies going into it, and Germany was slightly on alert about it, but nothing had really been closed down. But I was definitely sort of, slightly chastened by it. And I got home in February. Funnily enough, about, not many people know this story I'm going to tell. About 5 days later, I suddenly, upon returning home, was hit by fever, chills, stiffness up and down my spine, my legs, for about 4 days. And it wasn't enough to keep me in bed the whole time, but I certainly didn't leave the house for those 4 days. It was enough to make me house ridden, let's say. And then the symptoms resolved spontaneously. And I didn't think anything about that at the time. And it's only sort of in retrospect I've wondered, was that COVID? I suppose a few people have had that experience, but because I travel so much and had been traveling in that sort of early mid part of February and got home middle of February, I don't know, but it has definitely affected me because obviously, first of all, football didn't happen for a while, and that meant no games to commentate on. But it's affected me even more than that because of my location here in Massachusetts. I can't go anywhere, and I haven't wanted to go anywhere. I haven't really felt that it would be right for me to be going anywhere during this whole period, even though it were permitted. Now, people don't really want Americans or people from America to be traveling to Europe. That's been the case for a while because the case numbers here have been extremely high. So I've definitely missed that, but I've had to get on with my job in other ways. And this is the sort of the positive side of it, as I see it. I'm a big believer in the expression, necessity is the mother of invention. And out of necessity, we find different ways to do things. Now, with the FIFA game, which we spoke about earlier on, obviously, I would normally go into a studio and we spend days and days in a studio, not all at once, recording the content. This year, we came up with the idea after it was clear this was going to be affecting our lives for a long time. We came up with the idea that, if we couldn't get into a studio, we should simply, do the logical thing, the creative thing, and build a studio here. So that's what we did. And I got shipments daily of different aspects of items of broadcasting equipment. And in my little cupboards, just on the other side of the wall there, is my FIFA studio, and it has the perfect acoustics. We did a test of all the rooms in the house. That was the one that got the highest marks, as I thought it would, and that's where I've recorded FIFA. So FIFA 21 was done from my little cupboard there, and that's just one example. So, and then other things too that I've been able to do. Appearances on different shows for ESPN. There's some things, as I said, I've missed out on. I haven't been able to do world feed commentary on the Bundesliga since February, since that trip. I'm itching to get back. We have a technological solution that will allow me to get back doing that quite soon, which will be, wonderful, because that, of all the things I do, that really is up there as amongst the most enjoyable from my point of view. So I think we learn and we adapt, and it's why my one hope actually following this pandemic is that people say, "Oh, I just want to get back to normal." I always say, "No, I actually don't want to get back to normal. I want us to get back. I want us to get to better. I want us to learn from the last few months what we've all learned using technology like this, and how can we do things better instead of just saying, let's go back to what we were doing in February 2020. No, I don't think we have an excuse to do that. I think on a number of levels, there are things that we can do better, and let's hope we do.
Yeah. Is there anything you think COVID has changed in football that may remain the same once we return to any form of normality?
That's another really good question. I think that, and I hope that there will be a little bit more humility in football. I hope that it's sort of, listen, we love football. I love it. You love it. But I hope it maybe puts into perspective that it is a game. It's not our lives. It shouldn't be our lives. It should be something that we enjoy as a release away from the day-to-day things that maybe we have to do rather than want to do. It should be a pleasure. And I hope that maybe the pleasure will come back in it, that it doesn't become this kind of obsession all the time, but maybe something that we turn to when we have time to really enjoy it. Because that's always been my relationship with football. Now, of course, I've had to work hard to prepare for games. So I do come at it from a different angle. I don't go to games often as a fan. I do when I can. but I'm there to work most of the time. But I think that aspect, that there are other sort of smaller things along the way. But broadly speaking, I would say just that enjoyment part of it, not taking it too seriously, but just relishing it when we get the chance to enjoy it.
That's a fantastic answer. Is there any item of memorabilia that you look at every day and wish you could go back to that very moment?
Oh, goodness, yeah. I'm sure if I looked around my office here, I probably have a few things. I've got a few programs in my back cupboard there, and probably there are a few of those that I would love to revisit. Let me think what I've got here. I mean, I think the one that I would love to revisit, and I have the match program, and it's because it was so personal to me at the time, and it will stay with me forever, would be just to be able to go back and experience Aberdeen winning the Cup Winners' Cup again in 1983. And I'm so lucky because I was 16 at the time. I lived it. I loved it. I knew I was lucky. My father kept saying to me at that time, really enjoy this. He said, this is not coming again. This is, and it's funny because when you're a kid, and I was a kid back then, you don't really have perspective. So we all thought, and young kids nowadays will think that we were mad, but we all thought, because Aberdeen were the dominant team of the time, we thought this was forever. We thought, part of us thought, well, we're the best team. No, not just the best team in Scotland. We are genuinely
the best team in Europe.
Yeah. I mean, that was not an exaggeration at the time. And when you have that, you sort of think it's forever. You think that this is the natural order of it. I think it sounds, ridiculous to somebody of a younger generation now that Aberdeen, could be the best team in Europe, but they were. So I would just love to be able to go back to what I was doing on that day, funnily enough, not even at the game, but on Union Street. After Aberdeen came back from Gothenburg with the Cup Winners' Cup, and there was a bus stop procession. You can find the footage online of it. It looks really old now. I went to have a look at it earlier this year. We did a special for Aberdeen FC for the Red TV. I hosted it with Willie Miller, John Hewitt, Eric Black, Neil Simpson for the Gothenburg Greats, looking back on it. So I had a look at the footage again, and it looks like something from a bygone era now. It didn't seem like that at the time, but I'd love to put myself there again, the wee laddie who was on Union Street just watching this happen with the throngs of people. No room at all, just no elbow room, just a mass of Aberdonians all celebrating this one thing that really now seems almost like an impossible dream.
Yeah, well, I'll take you through a couple of my memorabilia.
Sure.
Just so it's a two-way street. One of the greatest things I've got is this artwork of Fadi scoring that goal in France.
In France, yeah.
And it's signed to Goggsy, happy 18th, best wishes.
Lovely. Oh, that's great.
Because
wonderful.
I've been quite fortunate because my uncle was the Motherwell team doctor for an amount of years, and I managed to go and meet quite a lot of the players during the time that he was the doctor, because I had that sort of direct contact.
Yeah.
So I've been able to amass quite a few good interviews. Another one I can't find at the moment is my first and only time I've seen Scotland play abroad, which was the San Marino game a couple of years ago. 2019.
Yep.
The trip was great until the game started.
I've heard that before, a lot of people say that down the years.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say is just the memories that I've collected supporting Motherwell. Of course, we had that season, we had 2 cup finals, and unfortunately we weren't good enough to win either of the cup finals, but just the journey of getting the almost 100% record of that season, going to every game, that was just sensational for me.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you have those memories, because I think as a young football fan, we all have these things and they stay with us forever. There's a magic about what you experience when you're younger as a football fan that doesn't apply so much as you get older. You become a bit more cynical, but those memories will be with you forever, I think.
Yeah, and now we're on to Scotland qualifying.
Yes.
Is there anyone better suited for the Scotland job than Steve Clarke?
Well, it would appear not. It would appear that we have the perfect fit now in terms of a Scotland manager. We've gone through various different personalities in the last 20 years or so and not really come up with the right person for the most part anyway. But I think we have somebody who is in keeping with where Scotland are at the moment. And I think significantly, Steve Clarke has made Scotland hard to beat again. And it has been far too long since we've been able to say that. It was the one thing that Scotland might have been limited, might not have had great players in every position, but there was usually an organisation and a tactical structure which came from the manager. You know, if you go back to Craig Brown's time, if you go back to the time when Walter Smith was in charge, Alec McLeish the first time, there was generally an organisation. And, you know, it would be a surprise if Scotland lost a game heavily. You know, they might lose a game, but it might be 1-0, might be 2-0 at worst. You weren't going to have these hammerings that suddenly became a feature of life as a Scotland fan. You know, these pastings, and it wasn't pleasant at all. Certainly wasn't pleasant for me. So I think in Steve Clarke, you have somebody who understands his squad, understands how to get the best out of them, understands how to think outside the box when necessary too, and even do things that maybe seem counterintuitive to a number of fans. I'm thinking about the back three setup with McTominay as part of the back three, and you know, most fans probably would have said, what's that all about? That doesn't make any sense. But it actually did make sense now that we see it, now that we have seen it. So I think finally Scotland got the right man. I was a bit critical of the SFA prior to that because, and I do stand by these words actually, I've always felt that in Scotland we limit ourselves a little bit when it comes to coaching ideas. Now, as I've said, I think we have the right man now in Steve Clarke, but I always felt sort of during my time working in Scotland that there was a feeling that the manager had to be a Scot and that we should limit ourselves just to Scots. Now, in an ideal world, that would be the case, of course, but think about it. You know, when it comes to players, we're always very creative. We find loopholes. We find players who have a connection to Scotland, even though they, you know, maybe don't really have a strong connection to Scotland. We sort of take the view that, well, if they qualify, then we can play them, we can have them in the Scotland squad. With managers, we've been very reluctant to do that. We've only done it once in my lifetime with Bertie Vogts. And he actually did get Scotland to a playoff, which people forget. He was not the most successful Scotland manager. He had his ups and downs. But I've never understood why people think because that didn't work, you know, in its entirety, that renders everybody who's not a Scot unqualified to be considered for the job. So that would be the only thing I would say is that, yes, I'm glad we have a good manager in Steve Clarke. I think that we should have been more open to outside influences prior to that, because there are so many good managers. I see them at every international tournament, managers who essentially do the rounds of countries and know how to organize a team. And I think that's where the SFA, again, in my opinion, went wrong for a spell, was in not being open-minded enough. But we can all agree that in Steve Clarke, they did make the right choice.
Absolutely. What were you doing the night of the Serbia v Scotland game?
The night of the Serbia-Scotland game, I was talking to you from this office. This is my home office here, and it was quite dark because it was afternoon here, but it was still quite dark as the match was finishing because the nights are fair drawing in, as they say. Yeah. And I was essentially watching it on my computer here, watching it on ESPN Plus, who had the rights to the game. And I was sitting watching it. I wasn't pacing around as I often would be. I was actually watching it quite calmly because I remember the game kicking off, and I remember thinking to myself, this actually appears to be quite good. I like the way Scotland are passing it around. There's not this, panic. There's not hoofing the ball forward. And, I know Serbia quite well. A few of their players play in Germany, whose football I cover a lot. And I saw, in contrast with Serbia, a team that looked a bit panicked and weighed down by it all. And this continued, of course, throughout the game, and it was really only when we got closer to 90 minutes and then that Scotland thing happened again that I sort of thought, maybe I was too confident. But no, I mean, honestly, I think it was a game that Scotland deserved to win. I mean, we have to do it the hard way. We don't usually believe in doing it the straightforward way. But I was remarkably calm in comparison with other Scotland games I've watched as a fan down the years.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, here in the Gogsy 99 studio, we were covering a watch along of the game, which was one of our best ever ones. And our reaction actually got on the Scotland national team YouTube channel.
Oh, lovely.
It was just
Tremendous.
a brief 5-second clip, but it was just to even be included in that was pretty special.
Superb.
So Scotland have never made it out of a group before in the major finals.
Yeah.
Is 2021 the year?
It could be, because it's not that difficult to get out of a group. That's the one thing you have to say. You know, when it's 24 teams in the tournament and 16 get out, you know, you sort of quite like your odds. And they have home advantage. Now, what home advantage will mean, we don't really know. I mean, it might not mean anything. We just, right now, talking in December before June, we just don't know. But it can't hurt, you would have to say. It can't hurt not having the travel considerations that you normally would have. So, you know, it's a group that could be difficult, but it might not be as difficult as we think. England should look after itself, although, you know, we are talking about a better England team in comparison with Scotland. I don't think anybody could deny that. But I did an interview with England actually the other day with a couple of English guys who told me that they are very worried about the Scotland game. They see that as the one that is set up for England almost to fail. And because England, of course, will be the big favourites. Scotland haven't been at a major tournament since 1998. There's the rivalry element, all of that. And they just think that could be a bit of a banana skin for England, potentially. You know, I think we know with Scotland that there will be some highs, there will be some lows too. You know, that is undoubtedly the case, especially against, you know, quality opposition. But having seen the Czech Republic, I don't think Scotland need to be afraid of the Czech Republic. Croatia, I do rate highly. I've always rated in recent years Croatia very highly. Their technical level is extraordinary. And that is not going to be easy at all. But, you know, one win and you have a real chance of making it, you know, as long as damage isn't inflicted upon you in the other matches. So I think there is a real chance, yes, finally, because I mean, I covered as a commentator many of those, you know, awful experiences, nearly moments, also as a young fan. And Scotland always seemed to get very close to, you know, within touching distance of making it out of the groups. You know, 74, I can still picture that. 78, Archie Gemmell's goal. 82, the Hansen and Miller mix-up. 86 against Uruguay when they should have won. 90 when I covered the game against Brazil, 7 minutes away from it. You know, one of these days, and maybe, you know, next year will be the time.
Yeah. Now we're on to make or break. It's the last wee couple of questions, just for fun. You have to make a match day playlist, but can only choose 3 artists in it, and why?
3 artists to choose. Okay, the 3 artists that I would choose would be ELO, Kate Bush. There you go. That's maybe a surprise.
Kate Bush. Sorry, I had to say that.
Kate Bush. Yeah, my era, 1970s, Kate Bush. And then the last one, an artist maybe people aren't familiar with, a German artist called Herbert Grönemeyer.
All right.
That would be the 3. But no, a lot of it is down to Kate Bush, actually. The reason for Kate Bush is I thought she was marvelous and just really talented. But her music was always playing from Pataudry when I was going there as a younger person. And it brings back memories. You know, almost all her hits would be played over the tannoy. Similarly, ELO, to be honest, that 1970s incarnation of ELO with Jeff Lynne as the creative force. And Herbert Grönemeyer was... Well, anybody who knows anything about German music is one of the foremost artists in the German world. But his music was also very synonymous with the 2006 World Cup in Germany, which, of course, I was at as a broadcaster. So, yeah, those 3 just off the top of my head.
If you can make a 5-a-side team of players you've witnessed play in the flesh, who'd be in it and why? 5-a-side
team. Well, I suppose we should have a goalkeeper. So best goalkeeper I have ever seen. I'm going to give that to Oliver Kahn, because I think he's just was so dominant and just an amazing presence. I would have to have Maradona in there, of course. I'd have to have him, having seen him in the flesh. I would have to have George Best in there. If you got Maradona and you've got Best, then you're absolutely laughing. As an Aberdonian, I'd have to have Willie Miller in there just to keep it tight at the back, because nobody did it better than him. And I'll give you one more, and that would be Franz Beckenbauer, who was just class on the pitch, and of course was a defender, but really started as a midfield player. You could put him anywhere, and I think that would be a pretty good five-a-side team.
If you could make a dream broadcasting team, who'd be in it?
That's a really good question. A football broadcasting team or
broadcasting team?
Well, this is going to be difficult, because if I don't mention certain people, they're going to be in the huff with me. I'll just name a few different. As the presenter, of course, I would have one of my best friends in the business, Daryl Curry, who everybody in Scotland knows, and is just really, really good at what he does. So Daryl would be my presenter in that team. I'll keep the Friends theme going. Ian Darke is possibly the best friend I have in the commentary business. So Ian gets my vote as commentator. He's just a great guy too, as well as being a really good commentator. So I have to put Ian in there, and people will know his work on football, not just football, but on boxing too. And then I suppose we should have a couple of different co-commentators on this one too. I'm going to throw Craig Burley in there, because I worked with Craig a lot in Scotland. In fact, when I went back to Scotland, he was my first co-commentator. So sentimentally, that means a lot. And he and I like to think we're quite a good and interesting partnership when we work together. And in fact, we work together now at ESPN here in the USA. He moved out here a few years ago, so I'd have to put Craig in the conversation, and we'll throw Gary McAllister in there too, because he's a Scotland legend, and always love what Gary has to say about football. So there's hopefully that's a good commentary team, good broadcast team for you.
I mean, I actually met Daryl once upon a time. Motherwell were playing Hibs, and I was the mascot. I was aged 11. And I think it was one of the first games that Scotland had on ESPN.
Oh yeah, well I did that game as well. I remember the game. It was the first of the season, and what was the score? I'm trying to remember what the score was. It was a draw, wasn't it?
2 Hibernian 3. It was a
2-3. That's right. It was a Sunday. That's right. I remember it was a high scoring game. Yeah.
It was just after Motherwell played Odense in Denmark on the Thursday, and we were kicking off. And Nick Blackman, that was when we first had Nick Blackman. And he was one of the first real technical players I saw Motherwell have. It was a shame he only lasted till January, and then Aberdeen, funnily enough.
That's right.
Because Craig Brown jumped ship to Aberdeen. But yeah, that was one of the most special moments as a Motherwell fan for me. Just walking onto that hallowed turf with Stephen Craigan.
Yeah, well, there's another one. Craigs is somebody who I know well, and I've spent many an enjoyable time with talking about football. A colleague at ESPN and BT Sport. So yeah, it's a small world.
Yeah. Picture the scene. You're in the pick and mix aisle of a sweet shop and can only choose 3 sweets. What do you choose and why?
It's been a long time since I ever did the pick and mix thing. I'll go back to my childhood. I used to like I never liked the sweets that were chewy, because they would take your fillings out, things like that. So I never liked that. So it was always the kind of the soft centered ones. Mm-hmm. So I'll go for the coffee ones, coffee flavored sweets.
All right.
Do they have them nowadays? Maybe I'm going back.
Is that like what's? I'm trying to remember. I don't really have the coffee flavored sweets.
We used to have, when I was younger, I'll tell you what, when I was younger, we used to have all these different soft centered sweets in the pick and mix aisle. And I would generally go for the coffee ones. I like the strawberry ones, and I like the vanilla ones, and that was it. I didn't go for any of the things that were chewy or caramel. No, stay away from that.
Keep the gimmicks away.
Yeah. Plain and simple. I was plain and simple boy when it came to that kind of stuff.
Now, I've asked you some questions. It's now your turn to ask me one.
Okay, I'll ask you this question. As a Motherwell fan, are you happy with the trajectory, the development of the club in the last, let's say, the last 3 or 4 years?
I'd say over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, we come and go, really. Like we tend to always have one really good season full of memories, and then one season we're just like mid-table, mediocre at best. Of course, what you want to see as a football fan, you want to see your club build on the success you had the previous year, and we never tend to do that. For example, a prime example, in fact, we played Stjarnan and got knocked out by them in Iceland back the season that we then went and beat Rangers in the playoff. That is a perfect example of what Motherwell's been like. But to be honest, I do wish we could do a lot more. But at the same time, in terms of transfer fees, Robbo doesn't really recoup what he gets, and then he can't really spend. For example, we got like 1.75 million for James Scott. We can't exactly see that money going back into the transfer budget. Most of it's going to go back to redeveloping the club. For example, we're redeveloping the training ground, etc. But performance-wise on the pitch, plain and simple, not entirely. I would like to see a bit more done on the pitch, and I'd like to see us be more consistent, at least in the top 6.
Great answer. You covered it.
There we go. And one last thing. Can you nominate someone to feature in the next podcast?
Nominate somebody to feature on the next podcast. Let me think about this. Well, I mentioned Craig Burley earlier. We could try to get Craig. He doesn't always do interviews. I will tell you that in advance. He doesn't always do them. But maybe we could try to twist his arm a little bit. I think he'd be an interesting guest for you because he does have really good, strong opinions. And, of course, he's a former Scotland player. And
help for the documentary, yeah.
Say again, sorry?
It would help for the documentary I'm making as well.
Yeah. Well, I think that would be a good shout for you. And so if you decide to go down that road, let me know, and I'll see if we can twist his arm a little bit.
Let's do it then. Fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in and watching this fantastic podcast. And thank you very much, Derek, for your time. And I hope all is well with you over across the pond. And
thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It's been great fun, Gordon, and best to you with your endeavours as we go forward.